She stacked the sandbags, quiet, unseen, a vest strap glinting with a shadowed sheen. The general's eyes caught the hidden sign, a nightshade past she thought left behind. Courage, betrayal, and secrets unfold. A soldier's true story, brave and bold. Asterisk, if you enjoy thrilling stories of courage and secrets, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss an adventure. Now, let's dive into the story of Avery Collins, a soldier. Underestimated, challenged, and tested by shadows she thought she'd left behind. The morning sun had barely risen over the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, a small town in northern Georgia, when Sergeant Avery Collins tightened the straps of her vest and stepped into the gravel-lined yard of Fort Harrow, the local National Guard base. The crisp air bit at her cheeks, and the scent of damp earth mingled with the faint odor of motor oil and metal from the nearby vehicle depot. Avery's hands were already calloused, her fingers numb from gripping heavy sandbags. Yet she moved, with a steady rhythm, stacking each bag with precision, as if every careful motion were a quiet act of defiance. The men around her snickered under their breaths, exchanging knowing looks. "Bet she's trying to prove something," muttered one corporal, a young man named Reese, barely out of high school, his voice dripping with skepticism. Avery didn't flinch. She had grown accustomed to their whispers, the subtle ways people doubted her simply because she was a woman in a role they still considered too tough for her. Every grunt, every scoff, every sideways glance only strengthened the resolve that had carried her through years of physical training, drills, and missions that demanded more than most could bear. She wasn't here to win their approval. She was here to serve, to prepare, to survive. She hoisted another sandbag, feeling the weight pull at her shoulders. Her mind drifted, as it often did during these early hours, to the Nightshade Unit, the clandestine division she had once served with. She had left that world behind, or at least she had tried to. The unit wasn't something most people understood. It wasn't about medals or parades. It was about precision, about shadows and loyalty, and missions that tested the very limits of your courage. And now, here, on this quiet base, she was a regular sergeant, an almost invisible cog in a military machine that didn't see the depth of her experience. "Hey, Collins," Reese called, tossing a sandbag toward her with a careless grunt. "You sure you're up for this? Those bags aren't exactly Barbie dolls." His laugh echoed off the concrete walls, and a few other soldiers joined in. Avery set the bag down, wiping a sheen of sweat from her brow. Her voice was calm, measured, carrying the quiet authority she had honed over years of tense operations. "I've been carrying heavier loads than that. Focus on your own work." The laughter subsided slightly, but the skepticism lingered in the air like smoke. Avery ignored it, methodically stacking bags in neat rows, her movements almost meditative. Each one was a reminder that she belonged here as much as anyone, if not more. The general wasn't due for another hour, but the base hummed with the kind of disciplined chaos that always preceded inspection. Soldiers moved with purpose, boots crunching on gravel, radios squawking intermittent messages. Avery adjusted her vest and glanced down, catching the glint of the small Nightshade Unit patch tucked into the strap. It was subtle, easily missed by someone who didn't know what to look for, but it mattered to her. A piece of her identity she refused to leave behind entirely. The patch had a story behind it, one that was heavy with sacrifice and unspeakable choices. Every mission had demanded not only skill, but the willingness to make decisions that weighed on her soul long after. The adrenaline faded. Most people never knew the kind of courage it took to operate in the shadows, a kind that wasn't about glory but survival, and the quiet heartbreak of seeing the world remain oblivious to the sacrifices made in its name. Her reverie was broken by a shout. Collins, step aside. A lieutenant, tall and narrow-faced, gestured impatiently. Avery complied, moving to the edge of the stack. She watched as a few younger soldiers stumbled slightly under the weight of their bags, sweat streaking their foreheads. A pang of empathy hit her. She had been in their shoes once, awkward, underestimated, and eager to prove herself. Only she had known the darker, grimmer side of service that never made it to these drills. Then came the crunch of boots on gravel, heavier this time. The sharp, exact rhythm that only someone like General Marcus Deering could command. Avery's heart tightened in a strange mixture of apprehension and curiosity. He was a man whose presence demanded attention, whose reputation for strict discipline and unwavering standards was known across the state's military network. Soldiers straightened, conversations stopped mid-word, and an almost tangible hush fell over the yard. The general's eyes swept across the stacks of sandbags, lingering briefly on each group of soldiers. When they met Avery's, something subtle shifted. It wasn't immediate recognition, not yet, but a flicker of interest, a brief pause that set her pulse a little faster. She adjusted her vest instinctively, almost out of habit, ensuring the nightshade patch peaked just enough to catch a trained eye dot. No one else noticed it. At least, she thought they didn't. But General Deering's sharp gaze was different. It didn't just see soldiers. It saw experience, history, and the kind of quiet strength that didn't need to shout to be acknowledged. Avery returned his glance with the calm, measured confidence she carried like armor, letting nothing betray the storm of memories that surged behind her eyes. "You," the general said, pointing without raising his voice. "Step forward." Younger soldiers around her exchanged nervous glances. Avery's heart didn't race. She had faced far worse than a general's scrutiny. She stepped forward, boots crunching against gravel, keeping her movements smooth and deliberate. "Collins," the general said, voice low but commanding, "your technique in stacking is precise, efficient, but that's not what caught my attention." His eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the vest strap. "Nightshade Unit, huh?" A hush fell. Avery felt the tension in the yard spike, a mixture of curiosity, disbelief, and unease. Some soldiers froze, others whispered under their breath. The Nightshade Unit wasn't just a name. It was legend, mystery, and for some, a warning. Few had ever seen its operatives up close, and even fewer had returned unchanged. Avery didn't flinch. "Yes, sir," she said simply. Her voice was steady, even as a mix of adrenaline and memories surged through her. The patch had been more than a symbol. It was a statement. A piece of her history that refused to be hidden, even in a place that had underestimated her from the start. The general nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on her. "I thought so. I've heard the rumors. I've seen the reports. I didn't expect to find one of you here, stacking sandbags like the rest of them." Avery allowed herself the smallest hint of a smile. "I do what needs to be done, sir, no matter where I am." The general's expression softened slightly, though the weight of authority remained. "Good. That's the kind of strength this base needs. Not the kind that boasts or complains. The kind that works quietly and effectively. Remember that, Collins." A murmur ran through the soldiers around her. Avery felt a mix of satisfaction and vindication. The sneers, the mocking whispers, they didn't matter anymore. Not to her. As the general moved down the line, inspecting the other soldiers, Avery returned to her work. Each sandbag she lifted felt lighter now, not because the weight had changed, but because the silent acknowledgement from a man of authority validated what she had always known. Her strength, skill, and courage were real. Not for them, not for anyone else, only for herself. And yet, deep down, Avery knew this was only the beginning. The Nightshade badge on her vest strap wasn't just a symbol of her past. It was a spark. A reminder that shadows have a way of returning, that unfinished business often finds its way back into the light dot as she stacked the final bag for the morning drill. Her mind wandered to the calcines, the covert missions, the sacrifices that had shaped her. She thought of comrades lost, of lives she had saved quietly, without recognition. And she realized something. Maybe, just maybe, the world was finally starting to see her for what she really was. Avery straightened, hands on hips, surveying the neatly stacked wall of sandbags. The sun had risen higher now, casting long shadows across the gravel yard. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, slicing the silence with its sharp call. She let out a slow breath, feeling the tension ease slightly. It was going to be a long day, but for the first time in a long time, Avery felt ready to face it. Not as someone underestimated, not as someone mocked, but as a soldier, a warrior, and a woman who had survived the darkness and was stepping into the light. The days after the general's inspection passed in a blur of drills and duties. Cedar Ridge was quiet compared to the operational zones Avery had once navigated, but that didn't make it easy. If anything, the monotony of stacking sandbags and checking supplies made the memories of Nightshade Unit missions rise sharper, like edges she couldn't dull. Every thump of boots on gravel, every barked order, and even the occasional hiss of tires on wet asphalt seemed to trigger fragments of a life most people couldn't imagine. Her fellow soldiers kept their distance at first, not out of malice, but out of the subtle fear that came with being close to someone whose reputation preceded her. Reese's mocking smirk had faded into wary glances. The younger soldiers weren't sure if she was to be envied, feared, or simply left alone. Avery didn't mind. She had learned long ago that trust was earned, not assumed, and some lessons came at a higher price than others. One afternoon, as she adjusted the perimeter barriers near the supply depot, a voice called out, "Sergeant Collins." It was Lieutenant Harper, a mid-level officer who had always seemed determined to keep order without making waves. Avery turned, noting the slight hesitance in his posture. "Yes, sir?" she asked, wiping her hands on her vest. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Sir, General Deering requested a word with you. Alone." Avery's stomach tightened, though her expression remained neutral. A private audience with the general was rare, and it was clear this wasn't casual small talk. She nodded, falling into step as he led her to the edge of the yard, where a line of pines shielded them from the rest of the base. The smell of pine resin mixed with the faint, metallic tang of the base's machinery. General Deering's posture was rigid as ever, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there during the initial inspection. Something calculated, like he had seen more than just the sandbags and the patch. "Collins," he began, voice measured. "You've been quiet, methodical, efficient. That's admirable. But there's more to you than this base sees, isn't there?" Avery squared her shoulders. "Sir, I perform my duties. That's all anyone should expect." He shook his head, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk tugging at his lips. "I've been around the military long enough to recognize shadows when they move in the light. Nightshade Unit isn't a name tossed around lightly. You didn't come here to hide, it's obvious. But I need to know. Why now? Why Cedar Ridge?" Avery exhaled slowly, the words she had been holding back for months pressing against her throat. "I left the unit, sir. I needed something stable, something normal. Cedar Ridge seemed like the right place." The general studied her for a long moment, and Avery could almost feel the weight of his judgment pressing down like a physical force. Normal doesn't erase the past, and the past has a way of finding people who think they've escaped it. She looked away briefly, remembering missions where a single misstep meant disaster. Nightshade was a world of secrets and shadows, a place where choices were measured in lives, not approvals. "I'm aware of that, sir," she said quietly. Good, he replied, because something has come up, something you need to know about, and I think you're the only one capable of handling it properly. Avery's pulse quickened, a familiar mix of anticipation and apprehension. Her instincts, honed through years of clandestine operations, stirred. Whatever it wasn't going to be simple. And the fact that General Deering had sought her out alone made it clear it required discretion. You're talking about a mission? She asked cautiously. The general's gaze didn't waver. You could call it that. There's a situation developing near the northern outskirts of the county, reports of organized activity, suspicious movements. Nothing confirmed, nothing public. But it's enough to raise concern. We need someone who can handle delicate situations, someone with your experience. Avery's mind raced. In the past, missions like these were the kinds of assignments most soldiers never even heard about. They required not only skill, but emotional endurance, the ability to make split-second decisions under immense pressure. She could feel the familiar itch of adrenaline creeping along her spine, the memory of her past training coming alive like an old rhythm she'd never truly forgotten. I understand, sir, she said, her voice steady despite the sudden rush of tension. I'll need more details, of course. And the proper clearance. Already arranged, he replied. I want you to coordinate quietly. No alarms, no leaks. You're not just here for muscle. You're here for insight, judgment, and discretion. Nightshade taught you that, didn't it? Avery allowed herself the briefest smile. Yes, sir. I haven't forgotten. The general nodded. Then prepare. You'll leave at first light, and Collins. He paused, his gaze locking with hers. Don't underestimate what you're walking into. Some shadows are heavier than others, and not all of them come with a warning. As she walked back toward the main compound, Avery's mind churned with plans and contingencies. The base, the small town, the routine life she had sought it, suddenly felt fragile, a veneer over something far more complex. The whispers of doubt, the mocking glances she had endured, seemed insignificant now. The challenges ahead required more than endurance. They demanded courage, foresight, and an unshakable commitment to truth. Later that evening, Avery sat alone in her small quarters, the faint hum of the base outside her window. She reached for her vest and ran her fingers over the nightshade patch. Memories flooded back, missions in hostile territories, operations conducted under the cover of darkness, the bonds forged in life-or-death situations. She had always known that these skills were rare, that they were dangerous, and that they set her apart in ways most people couldn't understand. And yet, the life she had tried to build here, among ordinary soldiers and quiet routines, had never felt entirely sufficient. It was a compromise, a place to rest her body and mind, but it wasn't where she truly belonged. Her instincts, her training, her very nature demanded engagement, action, confrontation with the world's complexities. The first rays of dawn would bring new challenges. And Avery, with her strength tempered by experience and her mind sharpened by years of shadows, was ready to meet them. She stood at the window, looking out over the base, feeling a strange mixture of calm and anticipation. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel underestimated. Not by the men around her, not by the general, and certainly not by herself, because Avery Collins knew the weight of shadows, and she knew how to carry them. The night before the operation, Avery barely slept. Her small room in the Cedar Ridge barracks was quiet, yet her mind was alive with plans, contingencies, and the constant hum of past memories. Maps were spread across the desk, dotted with notes. In her precise handwriting, satellite images, local reports, and reconnaissance briefings all pointed to the same unsettling conclusion. Something or someone was organizing in the northern outskirts of the county, just beyond the farmlands. And abandoned warehouses dotted First Light, The base stirred with the usual energy of a military morning. Boots on gravel, radios crackling, engines starting, and the distant whine of a generator marked the rhythm of life here. Avery slipped into her vest, checked her gear, and headed to the designated pickup point. The nightshade patch on her strap was subtle, yet she adjusted it just enough to be visible, a silent acknowledgement of the skills she would need in the hours ahead. Lieutenant Harper met her at the edge of the convoy. "Sergeant Collins," he said quietly, "the General insists on keeping this contained. Minimal personnel. You're leading, but discretion is paramount." Avery nodded. She had expected nothing less. "Understood. How many are assigned?" "Just 2 support operatives and you. Satellite feed, communications, and tactical assistance. No one else. Too risky to involve the main unit." Harper's voice lowered. "The locals. Some of them aren't what they seem. Rumors of organized crime, possible weapons trafficking. Nothing confirmed yet, but it's enough to make us cautious." Avery's lips pressed together. This wasn't her first brush with danger. She knew how rumors could morph into threats, and threats could escalate faster than anyone anticipated. "Good," she said. "Let's move." The convoy wound through back roads, past fields dotted with livestock, and over creeks that reflected the pale morning light. The world outside the base felt serene, almost peaceful, but Avery's instincts told her otherwise. Every shadow, every shift in the wind, every abandoned barn along the route was a potential point of observation. Her experience in Nightshade had trained her to see beyond what was visible, to anticipate threats before they fully materialized. By mid-morning, they reached the perimeter of the area in question, a patchwork of overgrown fields and derelict warehouses. Avery signaled the convoy to stop a safe distance away. She stepped out, scanning the area with a practiced eye, noting entrances, exit routes, and potential vantage points. "This place is too quiet," she muttered under her breath. Silence was rarely a good sign in her line of work. Her 2 support operatives, Sergeant Daniels and Corporal Vega, flanked her as she approached the first warehouse. Both were competent, well-trained, but young and untested in situations of real danger. Avery kept a watchful eye on them, aware that the slightest misstep could compromise everything. Inside the warehouse, the air was musty, thick with dust and the scent of decay. Wooden crates were stacked haphazardly, and remnants of old machinery lay rusting in corners. Avery's heart rate didn't spike, though her senses were razor-sharp. This wasn't about fear. It was about focus, awareness, and the ability to react instantly. She moved silently, gesturing for the others to follow. As they rounded a corner, faint noises reached her ears, metal scraping against metal, muffled voices in the distance. Avery signaled for them to take cover behind a stack of crates. "This isn't just local trouble," she whispered. "This is organized. Someone knows what they're doing. Stay sharp." The operatives nodded, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and anxiety. Avery could feel the tension radiating off them, but she remained calm, projecting control and confidence. Leadership wasn't about being liked. It was about being relied upon when the stakes were highest. As they moved deeper into the warehouse, Avery's mind flickered back to Nightshade missions operations, where failure meant lives lost, where the shadows were alive with danger, and where hesitation could be fatal. The memories weren't nostalgic. They were instructive. She drew on every lesson learned, every instinct honed through years of training, letting it guide her decisions. Suddenly, a sharp metallic clang echoed from the far end of the room. Avery froze, her heart tightening, not with fear, but with anticipation. She signaled for Daniels and Vega to stay low, scanning the space ahead. 2 figures emerged from behind crates, their movements quick, precise, and armed. "Hands where I can see them," Avery barked, stepping into view. Her voice was authoritative, calm, carrying the weight of experience that only someone who had survived the shadows could command. The figures hesitated, eyes narrowing as they took in the woman before them. Avery could see doubt flicker in their expressions. They had expected someone smaller, weaker, someone they could intimidate. Instead, they were met with a soldier who moved like a predator in control of her environment. "You don't want to do this," she said, keeping her tone even but firm. "Walk away and no one gets hurt." The hesitation lasted only a moment before one of the men lunged, a knife glinting in the dim light. Avery reacted instantly, blocking the strike and twisting the assailant's arm with a precision that sent him crashing into a stack of crates. The second man swung a metal pipe, but she sidestepped, letting his momentum carry him into a corner. Daniels and Vega rushed to subdue them under her direction, but it was Avery's presence, her authority, and her skill that dominated the encounter. Once the men were secured, Avery searched them quickly, discovering a map marked with locations across the county, coordinates that indicated planning beyond this warehouse. Weapons and communication devices were neatly tucked into hidden pockets. It was far more than petty crime. It was preparation, organized and deliberate. "This is bigger than we thought," she murmured, eyes narrowing. She knew immediately that the situation had implications reaching beyond Cedar Ridge. Whoever these men worked for had resources, connections, and intelligence. And they hadn't counted on someone like her being on the scene. Avery radioed Harper quietly, outlining the situation and requesting additional support while maintaining discretion. Every word was measured, precise, leaving nothing to chance. She moved back to the entrance, scanning the surrounding fields for signs of observation or backup. Nothing visible, but shadows had a way of hiding things. Later, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple, Avery allowed herself a moment to breathe. The warehouse was secured, the immediate threat contained, but the sense of unease lingered. She knew this was only the beginning. Northern County had secrets, and she had just scratched the surface. For the first time since leaving Nightshade, Avery felt the familiar rush of being truly tested. Not just physically, but emotionally. She had endured missions where fear and responsibility intertwined. She had made decisions that haunted her dreams, and those that saved lives at a cost most would never understand. And now here, in this quiet corner of Georgia, those instincts were alive again, guiding her every move. As they prepared to extract and report back to base, Avery caught a glimpse of the horizon, feeling the weight of her responsibilities pressing against her chest. Yet, unlike before, she wasn't alone. Daniels and Vega were learning, following her lead. The general had placed trust in her judgment. And most importantly, Avery felt a renewed sense of purpose, to confront not only the threats around her, but the shadows within her own past, refusing to let them define her unless she chose to wield that power herself. Because Avery Collins had survived the darkness before, and she was prepared to face it again on her terms. The nights at Cedar Ridge had a quiet that belied the tension simmering beneath the surface. Avery couldn't shake the feeling that the events in Northern County were only the tip of a far larger threat. Back at the base, the general had approved. Limited resources for surveillance, but Avery knew she couldn't rely solely on standard protocols. Sometimes official channels moved too slowly, hindered by bureaucracy, or were compromised by hidden agendas. She needed her own eyes, her own instincts, and the lessons honed over years in Nightshade Unit. In the small hours of the morning, she walked the perimeter of the base alone, the gravel crunching softly under her boots. The moonlight cast long shadows over the chain-link fence, and Avery's mind drifted to the missions she had left behind. Covert operations, intelligence gathering, and extraction protocols her past life had been a world of precision and secrecy. And for the first time since returning to Cedar Ridge, it seemed that world had followed her Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft beep from her secured communications device. It was a coded signal from Harper. "Sergeant Collins, we've intercepted additional intel. Meeting in 30. Avery nodded to herself, slipping back into the barracks to gather her gear. She packed lightly, taking only essentials, her movements smooth and deliberate. Her heart carried a steady rhythm, not from fear, but from anticipation. Nightshade had taught her that every decision mattered, and preparation was the shield that separated success from catastrophe. In the briefing room, Harper was already waiting with a secure laptop open. "Collins, we've cross-referenced the northern county coordinates with federal reports. There's a pattern: warehouses, abandoned farms, logistics hubs. Someone's building a network, possibly for smuggling or something more dangerous." He paused, glancing at her. "There's chatter suggesting links to organized crime groups that operate regionally. Nothing confirmed, but it's enough to warrant your expertise." Avery studied the data carefully. Her mind worked like a machine, sorting, analyzing, and predicting. Patterns emerged that were invisible to those less experienced. "This isn't just criminal activity," she said quietly. "It's coordinated, sophisticated. Whoever's behind it has experience, resources, and knowledge of surveillance methods. They know how to stay under the radar. This could go beyond Northern County." Harper nodded, clearly impressed despite himself. "That's what the general thinks too, but there's more. Satellite imagery shows unusual traffic near old industrial sites, dating back decades, places that were previously linked to Nightshade. Operations?" Avery's pulse tightened. Her past wasn't something she could entirely erase, and now it was colliding with her present. The realization brought a strange mix of apprehension and resolve. Nightshade's missions had left shadows, loopholes, unfinished operations, secrets meant to be buried. And now, it seemed, someone was exploiting them. She leaned back, fingers drumming on the table. "We need to identify who's orchestrating this network, and fast. Whoever it is, they've studied us or someone from my past. They know the weaknesses, the blind spots. And if they've figured out that I'm here, they might anticipate our moves." Harper swallowed. "You think it's personal?" Avery didn't answer immediately. Her training demanded caution, but the instinct she had relied on countless times whispered that the danger wasn't random. She allowed herself a small nod. "It might be. And if it is, we need to tread carefully. One wrong move could expose the base, or worse, the town." The next few days became a delicate dance. Avery led reconnaissance missions, often under the cover of darkness, mapping patterns of movement and supply routes. She relied on her intuition as much as the tools available, trained instincts guiding her. Through terrain, it was deceptively calm. Daniels and Vega followed her lead, growing more confident with each step, but Avery remained vigilant. She knew firsthand that in high-stakes situations, the smallest lapse could unravel everything. One evening, while surveying a suspected logistics hub near a dilapidated mill, Avery noticed signs that triggered memories she hadn't revisited in years. Tire tracks that matched military vehicles, subtle markings on crates, and coded signals etched into storage units, all reminiscent of Nightshade's operational protocols. The familiar precision sent a chill down her spine. "This isn't ordinary crime," she whispered to Daniels, who was scanning the perimeter nervously. "Someone is using Nightshade methods. Either an old operative or someone who learned from us." The realization hit like ice. Nightshade Unit's legacy had always been protected, hidden, almost mythical to outsiders. That someone was using its tactics outside official channels meant a breach of trust and possibly danger for everyone who had served. Avery's mind raced. She thought of past colleagues, missions where secrets were vital to survival, and the price of misplaced loyalty. Someone had access to knowledge meant to remain buried. Back at the base, she reported her findings with meticulous detail. The general listened, eyes narrowing. Collins, if what you're saying is true, this is no longer just a county-level concern. Someone has weaponized Nightshade knowledge. And they've chosen to act now. Avery's jaw tightened. Sir, I need clearance to pursue this independently. I need to track them before they escalate. If we wait for full confirmation, it may be too late. The general studied her silently, then nodded slowly. You have discretion. But Collins, be careful. These aren't amateurs. And if this is tied to Nightshade's past, then you're walking into familiar shadows. Avery felt the weight of responsibility settle squarely on her shoulders. She had survived the darkness once. She could survive it again. But now, it wasn't only about missions or tactics. It was about confronting ghosts she had long tried to leave behind. Every step she took brought her closer to a truth that could shake the foundations of everything she had worked to build in Cedar Ridge. That night, Avery sat alone in her quarters, the glow from her laptop illuminating her face. The maps and intercepted communications sprawled before her were more than operational data. They were pieces of a puzzle tied to her past. She traced the routes, noting anomalies, and felt a strange, almost painful familiarity with the methods being used. A knock at the door startled her. It was Vega, looking hesitant. Sergeant, are you okay? Avery gave a small, reassuring smile. I'm fine. Just thinking. This isn't like anything we've faced before. It's personal, and it's dangerous. But we'll handle it. Together. Vega nodded, clearly relieved by her calm demeanor. The young corporal had begun to see Avery, not just as a leader, but as someone who could carry the weight of impossible situations with clarity and courage. As Avery turned back to the maps, her eyes lingered on the coordinates that had started this chain of events. She clenched her fists slightly. Whoever was behind this thought they could manipulate shadows. But Avery Collins had spent her life mastering them, and she wasn't about to let the past be used as a weapon against the present. She felt the familiar spark ignite, the determination to confront what was coming, to protect those who couldn't, protect themselves, and to face the truth about the shadows she had once served. Northern County was only the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of surveillance, strategic planning, and cautious engagement. Avery moved through Northern County with a practiced vigilance, studying every shadow, noting every anomaly. Daniels and Vega were learning quickly, but Avery knew that no matter how skilled they became, their experience could never match hers. The weight of responsibility rested squarely on her shoulders. Every decision, every step, carried consequences that could ripple through the town, the base, and possibly beyond that. It was during a late-night reconnaissance at one of the abandoned warehouses that Avery first sensed the betrayal. Subtle discrepancies in the surveillance logs, miscommunications from Harper, and a strange hesitancy from one of the local informants didn't escape her trained eyes. The signs were faint but unmistakable. Someone inside the circle had leaked information. Avery's mind raced. Nightshade had taught her to trust very few, and to always assume that hidden threats could exist where you least expect them. Stay alert, she whispered to Daniels and Vega. We may not be alone, and if anyone is compromised, we handle it quietly. As they approached the second warehouse that night, Avery's instincts screamed danger. A lone figure stepped out from the shadows, a familiar face she hadn't seen in years. Captain Elena Rourke, a former Nightshade operative, and someone Avery had once considered a close ally, now stood with a cold, calculated expression. Elena? Avery's voice was sharp, laced with disbelief. Rourke's lips curved into a faint, unreadable smile. Avery, still playing soldier in the shadows, I see. The tension was immediate and thick. Avery's heart pounded not with fear, but with the recognition that the enemy was closer than she had anticipated. You're working with them, she said quietly, her eyes scanning for any hidden threats. Why? Rourke's gaze was steady. It's not about choice anymore. Nightshade's secrets, they're valuable. Some people aren't willing to let them fade into history. And I've learned how to survive. Avery's jaw tightened. Survival at the cost of betrayal was a concept she had faced before, but never from someone she had once trusted. You're risking lives, mine, theirs, everyone's. For what? Power. Information is power, Rourke replied calmly. And you know as well as I do that knowledge like ours doesn't disappear quietly. It's just a matter of who controls it. Avery's mind raced. She had to act quickly, strategically, and decisively. There was no room for hesitation. Then, you leave me no choice, she said. In a fluid motion honed by countless operations, she signaled Daniels and Vega to flank the entrances. The tension crackled like electricity in the air. The confrontation was tense and precise. Avery moved with the lethal grace of someone who had spent years mastering combat in shadows. Rourke countered with equal skill, and for a moment it was a dance of mirrored experience. The warehouse echoed with the sounds of struggle grunts, the clatter of metal, the snap of crates falling, and whispered commands. Daniels and Vega executed Avery's instructions flawlessly, cutting off potential escape routes and securing nearby threats. Despite their youth, they were becoming capable soldiers under Avery's guidance, responding instinctively to her commands. But the real battle was between Avery and Rourke, two women shaped by the same training, now divided by choices and loyalties. Avery managed to disarm Rourke, pressing her advantage without losing control. It doesn't have to end this way, she said, voice firm yet restrained. You can come back with me. You can help stop this before it escalates further. Rourke's eyes flickered with a mix of defiance and hesitation. For a moment, Avery thought she might relent. But the shadows of ambition and survival had already taken root. With a sudden, calculated move, Rourke slipped a small device from her pocket, an encrypted transmitter, and activated it. A low signal beeped, sending alerts to unknown recipients outside the county. Avery's heart sank. The network was broader than she had realized, and now the threat had escalated. She neutralized the immediate danger, restraining Rourke and securing the warehouse, but the larger picture loomed ominously. Whoever Rourke had contacted now had the advantage of early warning, and the stakes had grown exponentially. Back at Cedar Ridge, Avery debriefed the general. She was part of this all. Along, she said, voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her. Rourke isn't just a rogue operative. She's connected to a larger network, exploiting Nightshade knowledge. We need to act quickly before more cells activate. General Deering's expression was grave. I feared as much. Collins, your instincts were right. But this means the threat is far more complex than we anticipated. You'll need to lead the effort to dismantle it, but discretion is critical. One misstep and the consequences could be catastrophic. Avery nodded, feeling the full weight of the responsibility settle onto her shoulders. It was no longer about sandbags or proving her worth. It was about preventing a threat that could spiral out of control, using every ounce of skill, strategy, and emotional resilience she possessed. That night, Avery sat alone in her quarters, the faint glow of the laptop illuminating her determined expression. She traced the connections, noting weak points, possible intervention points, and potential threats. Her mind worked like a machine, but her heart carried the burden of trust betrayed. Rourke's actions weren't just a tactical threat. They were a personal reminder of the cost of choices made in shadows. She allowed herself a moment of reflection, thinking of the soldiers she had guided, the town she had sworn to protect, and the legacy of Nightshade that she had vowed to honor responsibly. Avery understood that this wasn't just a fight against an external enemy. It was a test of her own emotional strength. Her ability to lead, and her capacity to act decisively under pressure as dawn broke over Cedar Ridge, painting the horizon. With shades of gold and lavender, Avery prepared for the next phase of the operation. The betrayal had sharpened her resolve, clarified her mission, and reinforced her commitment to justice. She would confront the network, protect the innocent, and reclaim the shadows for the right purpose. Because Avery Collins had survived betrayal, mastered shadows, and faced impossible odds before, and she would do it again. This time, the stakes were higher, the enemies closer, and the consequences heavier. But Avery was ready. Northern County was no longer just a location. It was a battlefield of loyalty, strategy, and courage. And Avery would see it through to the end. The final operation began before dawn. Avery Collins moved with quiet precision, her mind a balance of strategy and instinct. Cedar Ridge had never felt so still, the town's streets empty and silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Every step she took was deliberate, every glance calculated, every sound carefully measured. The network Rourke had helped initiate was spreading fast, but Avery had pieced together their logistics, vulnerabilities, and likely strongholds. Tonight, she would strike decisively. Daniels and Vega followed her closely, having matured remarkably. Under her guidance, they moved like shadows themselves, trusting Avery's lead implicitly. The three slipped through Northern County's abandoned warehouses, fields, and overgrown rail lines, taking advantage of every vantage point and cover. Avery's pulse was steady, her focus unbreakable. This was more than an operation. It was a reclamation of justice and honor, a chance to expose corruption and redeem the misuse of Nightshade knowledge at the primary warehouse hub. Avery surveyed the scene. Men and women moved with urgency, loading crates and monitoring communications. Among them, Rourke had positioned herself as a coordinator, her expression still sharp, her confidence unnerving. Avery allowed herself a brief assessment. The enemy had numbers, but they lacked the coordination and foresight of someone trained in shadows as Avery had been. Daniels, Vega, Avery whispered, follow my lead. No unnecessary risks. We neutralize key operators first, secure the evidence, and isolate Rourke. Understood? Yes, Sergeant, they replied in unison, their voices steady in a series of swift, controlled movements. Avery initiated the operation. She moved through the perimeter, disabling cameras and cutting communications lines. Daniels and Vega subdued guards silently, the precision reflecting the hours of training Avery had instilled in them. Within minutes, chaos erupted inside the hub as Avery breached the main control room. Rourke looked up in surprise, eyes widening briefly before narrowing in recognition. You really can't leave the shadows behind, can you? She said, voice sharp. Not when the shadows are being used to harm people. Avery replied, stepping forward, her calm authority unyielding. The confrontation was intense, but controlled. Avery disarmed Rourke with fluid precision, neutralizing the immediate threat while keeping her focus on the larger goal, securing the hub, capturing evidence, and shutting down the network. Each action was deliberate, a mixture of strategy, skill, and emotional resolve. By midnight, the hub was secured, key members detained, and critical evidence documented. Avery stood amidst the subdued network, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of the mission finally lift. Cedar Ridge, and potentially countless other communities, was safe because she had acted decisively. The general arrived shortly after, accompanied by local law enforcement. He observed the scene with a mix of satisfaction and respect. Sergeant Collins, he said, his voice carrying weight, you've done more than I could have expected. You handled a threat that no one else would have recognized until it was too late. You've shown courage, skill, and integrity. Avery nodded quietly, letting the words settle. She knew the real reward wasn't praise. It was the knowledge that lives were protected, that justice had been served, and that the legacy of Nightshade had been reclaimed responsibly. Rourke, restrained and subdued, looked at Avery one last time. "This isn't over," she said, a faint edge of bitterness in her voice. "It is for now," Avery replied calmly, "and I'll make sure it stays that way." As the dawn broke over Northern County, the first rays of sunlight painting the warehouses and fields in soft gold, Avery felt a profound sense of closure. The shadows of the past had tested her, challenged her, and threatened everything she cared about. But she had met them with courage, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. She had faced betrayal, danger, and uncertainty, and emerged not just victorious, but respected, trusted, and vindicated. Back at Cedar Ridge, life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. Soldiers and townspeople looked at Avery differently, now not with skepticism or doubt, but with respect and admiration. The whispers had faded, replaced with acknowledgment of her strength and skill. She returned to her duties with calm authority, carrying the weight of her experiences with grace and dignity. Alone in her quarters one evening, Avery touched the nightshade patch on her vest strap. It had once been a symbol of hidden missions and secrecy, but now it was also a symbol of resilience, justice, and redemption. She had confronted the shadows, reclaimed her past, and ensured that her actions made a tangible difference. For Avery Collins, the journey had begun with sandbags, with being underestimated and mocked. It had carried her through betrayal, danger, and moral challenge. And it had ended with truth exposed, respect earned, and a sense of justice restored. The shadows had tested her, but Avery had emerged stronger. She was no longer just a soldier stacking sandbags. She was a guardian of secrets, a defender of the innocent, and a force capable of turning darkness into light. And as the small town of Cedar Ridge slept peacefully beneath the stars, Avery allowed herself a rare, quiet smile. She had survived the shadows. And this time, she had not only survived, they had been illuminated by her courage.